Welcome to Bicycle Retail Radio, presented by the National Bicycle Dealers Association. Bicycle Retail Radio brings together retailers, vendors, advocates, and thought leaders for honest discussions about the latest issues facing bicycle retailers. The podcast dives deep into the challenges and triumphs of the bicycle industry, providing an in-depth look at the person behind the profession. Aiming to deliver content that's both relatable and thought-provoking, offering real-world tips and insights to help you find success in the bicycle industry. There's a human side of the business, and the podcast aims to share stories, experiences, and strategies that you can apply in your own shop. Whether you're looking for inspiration, practical advice, or a sense of community, you've come to the right place. The National Bicycle Dealer Association has a rich history of supporting retailers across the nation. Founded in 1946 with a mission to strengthen specialty bicycle retailers through education, through research, through communication, and through advocacy. The National Bicycle Dealer Association is proudly supported by our members and our membership. If you'd like to learn more about the benefits of joining, please visit nbda.com.
All right, listeners, welcome to Bicycle Retail Radio. This is our News Hour podcast with the team at Human Powered Solutions, the micromobility experts. We are covering their Micromobility Reporter. This is a free publication that you can receive in your inbox by going to humanpoweredsolutions.com. You'll sign up to receive this monthly letter that keeps us up to date with what's happening in the industry. Mike, Steve, Jay, Fred, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this. And this is a really special episode today because the recent article that was just released is titled, "A Look at How the Election Results May Impact the Bicycle Industry." And since the election, I have received numerous inquiries from editors, publicists looking for information from the NBDA on, just how the election results will impact the industry. Specifically, tariffs has been a number one request of people. So I'm really excited to dive into this today with the experts here. So what we have is a one-year summary edition that is focused on the probabilities that will potentially have the greatest impact on the American bicycle business and bicycle retailers during the first half of 2025. And I know that this decision to do this year-end result wasn't taken lightly. It was something that Jay and Fred talked about. Can you give a little bit more to our listeners about why do this summary with kind of this look at how it may impact the bicycle industry forward?
Well, I think the initial thinking here is that, we had a national election. And from the standpoint of when we talked about this could have occurred, one of the options was obviously the election of the current incumbent. The current Trump, the challenger. So the incumbent and his administration is going to leave, and we'll have a new administration coming in. That scenario was one that we wanted to make sure, if it occurred, we could get our initial thinking and the initial posturing and the probabilities laid out so we could understand what's coming for the American bicycle business and for the market. So I think, basically achieved that, because what we tried to do was first focus on the key issues that we felt were the most important, and then we can add to it and shape it. Now, that does not in any way or shape or form exclude what's occurring with lithium-ion batteries, the issues that we're going to have to deal with regulation going forward, but certainly it impacts it. So now we have a different environment that we have to deal in. So that was the logic, is let's try to make sure that we've got that laid out, and we can begin then to add to it. But we've got a basic core coming out of the election in November, going into the coming year, which will be the inauguration in January, at which time the president-elect can begin to implement policy. And we've already heard, as of yesterday, some of those policies are being articulated. This is what I'm going to do. So it's, how does that affect the bike business?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad to see this summary, and it was really well written. And listeners, if you're driving, running, biking, whatever you're doing, it's humanpoweredsolutions.com. Go ahead and open up the article and read it yourself. Jay, it is important that Human Powered Solutions predictions of what appears to be the most probable future are informed guesses. And I want to make sure that our listeners and readers of the Micromobility Reporter understand that informed guesses, that's the best we can hope for, right? Like we're doing the best we can here with the information we have.
Correct. We're trying to take the available information, which we can present in excruciating detail if we need to, and give our best guess. We state that in the intro here. It's an educated guess. It's a probability. It's what we think will occur and why. And what all the way through the bike industry manufacturers, brands, but specifically to the specialty bike retailers, the bike shops, what can they put into their planning? What can you take into the P2 meetings and
Yeah.
talk about so that it can be incorporated into the planning process?
And Jay, this is the collective wisdom of the entire Human Powered Solutions team, right? So Fred, Mike, Steve, everyone was in on these conversations that really boiled this down to the 3 points presented. Is that correct?
Essentially, but I'll take responsibility for having shaped it and then let these other 4 guys chip in, and you, the 5 of you, go ahead and critique this as we go forward, because the key here is how do we add to it? So the 3 pieces, the idea of looking first at trade and tariffs, that's because primarily, as you said, both of us are getting a lot of inquiry as to what's going to happen with trades and tariffs. And it's already evolving as we're speaking. As I said yesterday, there were some major announcements that stirred up the markets. Within that, we're looking at the impact on product cost, wholesaling from our standpoint, and more importantly, retail pricing. What's going to happen with retail prices? The impact on retail profit margins, right to the bike shops. What does this mean to the profit margin potential going forward, and how do you plan for it? And then the issues of reshoring and nearshoring, which, Heather, in one of our conversations in the past week, that was one of your concerns. We're going to have domestic manufacturing. Are we or aren't we? How is that going to play out? The other 2 pieces, again, I think we have to explain briefly, and that was we wanted to look at the economy from the standpoint of initially the consumer spending issues as they relate to bike shops, inflation, which isn't done, unemployment, which is going to become an issue, and immigration, believe it or not, fitting into the economic side, which is extremely important. And we go into that a bit in the article itself, and that's going to go back and forth. It came up again in the most recent yesterday in the president-elect stating he wants to put tariffs on 3 countries, and part of his reasoning is migration.
Mm-hmm.
So he's drawing the dots. We're trying to do that as well. As how does that affect the bicycle industry and the bike shop trade? And lastly, labor in this section. And the piece we pick out there is key, because there's a looming dock strike that's going to become extremely important to the trade as we go forward here. And then climate change. And this is not a political statement. This is a reality of fact. The impact of weather events, the impact of climate change on cycling per se. What does it mean to riders and ridership? Where can people ride? Where can't they? How do we predict that? How do we help them understand that? The impact of regional economies and bike shops of climate change is what we're after in putting these pieces together. This is subject to what our readers tell us, to what the 4 of you tell me, and what we see in the marketplace, because we'll evolve this as we go. And I think we'll probably be adding to the list.
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate the summary. And when I was reading the list myself, I was like, yeah, this summarizes what I've heard from retailers. It summarizes what I've heard from suppliers and from the media inquiries about the potential changes ahead of us. Anyone else want to chime in here, or should I just keep moving on? Fred, Mike, Steve?
I guess I could chime in a little bit here. I think we know less than we would like at this point, because there's always a difference in history anyway between what a politician promises and then what they act on and what they prioritize. And then there's also a time lag, and there's also institutional blockages. And so even though the incoming president has promised disruption and he's laid out what he wants to do, I think it's really important to know that we just don't know.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment, Fred. I have been in all my responses saying it's too soon to react. It's too, like, we just need to kind of have all the information and be ready should something change, but we don't know which direction things are gonna go. Anyone else? Steve, Mike? All right, let's.
Oh, that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, I agree. Jay
Yeah.
hit all the key points.
I'd like to, Jay, if it's okay, then just get a little more granular now with trade tariffs, reshoring, inflation, and how that might impact bike shop operations, product costs, wholesale, retail pricing. I know it's a big question, but just your thoughts on tariffs at this point.
Well, since the article was published yesterday, or the newsletter was published yesterday, I've received several responses indicating that I'm fairly close on the assumptions that are being made relative to tariffs. And this includes the people that are in our industry that advise the Commerce Department and advise the United States Special Trade Rep. So there are people that are in the know that have studied this for years, this being the tariff question, which is complex. But the basic feedback I've gotten in the last 24 hours is that we're correct in assuming that there will be tariff increases. The point here is that a tariff is a tax. It's a tax on the importer of record. That means that it's going to be passed along and eventually find its way to retail pricing. This is not a tax on the country of origin. It's not a tax on the manufacturing centers offshore. So we've already had a very convoluted situation relative to pricing that has been impacted by sales, by the mix of product that we've got in inventory because of the inventory glut. We have not seen, in my opinion, the reality of the impact of things like tariffs, particularly the punitives at 25% ad valorem additional on Chinese import over and above the regular tariffs. We haven't seen the full impact of that relative to the marketplace, except what we're seeing on a regular basis that alarms us. And that is that retail sales are soft, especially bike retail sales are soft. Now, you're conducting a very important consumer survey right now.
Yeah.
That if we reach the 2,000 or more goal of the number of consumers around the country, will give us by December a good feel for how bike shop customers and folks that deal with the bike shop trade, what consumers, why they backed off, when they'll come back, what they're buying, a lot of questions that we need answers to relative to what's in the mind of the consumer. But what we're also getting feedback on in the last 24 hours is the fact that part of this is because of the market itself. And what I'm concerned about and what you're trying to combat and deal with is that the US market is being looked at being on a downward curve, that the arc is running down. And we're seeing this in the reality, that we're going to get back into a rut of 10 million roughly per year in the turnover in units, but that 80% of that's going to be in the mass market and 20% will be in the specialty segments. Now, if you look at the current marketplace, that's also convoluted, because the latest look that Rick Vosper took us down the path of in the last month is that there are at least 12 buckets of dealers, 12 types of specialty bike retailers that are currently in the market. Some have been added, some are new, some are changes from what we knew traditionally pre-pandemic. But all of that goes to, are we really measuring the depth of the market? Are we looking at the size of the market? Do we understand specialty bike retail as well as we should? So the whole purpose here is to bring some clarity to that. And Fred's absolutely correct. We don't know. The whole objective here is to get as much information, to get as close to the probabilities. What are the things that are occurring in the market? Not just one, but maybe two or three that give us the best ability to begin to plan, to
Mhm.
get an idea of what we could do in order to affect the future and how we can change that future from a planning and business standpoint.
Yeah. Oh, that's where I wanted to go with this. From a planning standpoint, then, are there any specific steps that bicycle retailers can take now to prepare for these potential increase in tariffs, especially those items originating from China?
Yes. Now keep in mind that as of yesterday, what's being threatened is an additional slapping of another 10% on Chinese import, and it's being aimed in this case, at the drug trade and fentanyl. And so there's a complexity to what's happening here between the threats made against China, Mexico, and Canada relative to different tariff applications. But it's 10% on top of the current tariff for China, which is being threatened. It may not happen. This is a bargaining chip. This is what, as Fred said, this goes into what politicians say. Keep in mind, this is a president-elect that isn't even in office yet. His cabinet has not been vetted by the Senate, nor any other process to put them in office. This is simply verbiage. But it's an indication from the standpoint that we're getting feedback from other people that know what's going on in the tariffs and are confirming the assumption that especially bike retailers have to do what you've already advised they do from a planning standpoint, and that's look at other sources of revenue. Take a very careful look at the brands they're doing business with and don't let them load them up with inventory because that's the kiss of death.
Mhm.
Make sure that they're good quality products that Mike can speak to, and that is that in the case of e-bikes, which are ingrained in the market now, they're a category that's a new piece that we have to look at, we have to nurture, and we have to make sure that they're UL compliant, that we've got certifications of compliance to testing that shows that the products are compliant to UL 2849 for complete product, UL 2271 for the lithium-ion batteries. That becomes extremely important in the mix. I think that the other two things quickly in the time frame here is that retailers need to look at other sources of income and revenue, look at the crossover markets, look at what you've already introduced. We've talked about this before as a wintertime product. And we also need to look at the circular market, the
Use the-
circular economy of the used market and the potential. The last cost of doing business study showed that the dealers that did turn to the circular economy, were selling used product, that the bicycles yielded uh, a realized margin after discounts, etc., of 50%. But yet we had, if I remember the number right, less than 8% of the retailers reported they were dealing in that kind of trade, that they were taking advantage of that margin. So that, and I think be conservative. Right
Yeah.
now is a time to be absolutely conservative.
Fred, if you were a retailer right now, I'm going to put you on the spot, totally sorry. And knowing that these potential tariffs are looming, do you think there's anything you would be doing with your inventory or just planning?
Well, it depends on if you're a gambler or not. Do you like roulette or not? Because everything is almost everything in business is an unknown. We don't know how the economy is going to react to tariffs, whether consumers will continue to spend. If prices go up that much, the bicycles probably aren't their top priority. What's your supply chain? As Jay referenced, the dock workers' potential strike. And even if they're, even with no strike, you're going to have tensions between I guess, unfortunately for the bicycle industry, so much of our product comes from China, and that's one country that's being targeted. So, what it's tempting to say, oh, stock up because whatever supply disruption may come, you'll be able to, weather it better than the ones that didn't, or pare it way back because you don't really know and you'll just react the best you can at the time. I I don't think if I were a retailer, I wouldn't make any significant changes right now other than to remind myself to be lean and flexible. Um, and so I don't want to go on and on here, but I had to get my Donald Rumsfeld note in here. He didn't invent this, but he popularized it. That when looking at any dynamic situation, you have known knowns, the things that you know that are known. You have known unknowns, that you are aware that there's something I don't know, that it's just an unknown. And then you have unknown unknowns, things you don't even know that you don't know. And I think if you're, and then of course the fourth one that I saw and recently added is the unknown known, a known, but your refusal to acknowledge something that you know is also a factor, because we're human beings and we're flexible. So if you looked at a meter on each of those, I'd say the known knowns are down. The meter's trending down. The known unknowns, we know that an unknown is tariffs and supply and all of that. Well, that meter, it's trending up. And I think unknown unknowns, because you don't know what action A is going to cause downstream, that meter is also reading up. And then I think the fourth one, the unknown known, where you just deny reality, that's really hard to predict. We've had a lot of that going on, but once prices start to change, or supply businesses start to employments, maybe some of that willful ignorance evaporates in the face of reality that you just can't ignore. So.
Yeah, no, I like that you brought that up, Fred. We actually do that exercise in our P2 groups with a group of peers, like the things you don't know that you just can't even see about yourself. I love that. And it's true. So I think it's really great to have your viewpoint on this, because there is a lot of things that are unknown. Jay, just quickly here, you also mentioned the importance of two main events, the Congressional Bike Caucus and the League of American Bicyclists National Bike Summit, as important events for bicycle retailers in 2025. What do we need to know? Like, why? I've already got the bike summit on my agenda, but what is here for our listeners that they should be paying attention to?
Well, that's a March event, as you know. In fact, Mike and I are actively talking about joining you at that event.
Oh, nice.
Because we feel it's that important. I've talked to Corinne Whitaker, who is the number 2 in the league, but also deals with all the governmental affairs. And talking to her, it's become obvious that, as I said briefly in the article, because you've got a new Senate majority leader and a new Senate configuration with the Republicans now in the majority in the Senate, you're going to see a total redo of the committees. And that could take, and committee staff, and that could take the first 3 months of the year. I think the summit is an excellent time to get the league's feel and read on both the makeup of the House committees and the Senate committees as to who is going to be moving legislation supporting bicycling. And then I ask a bottom line question: who rides bikes? We need to know who's going to be in the bike caucus. And I'll give you a good example. We know that the current Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg, rides his bike to work every day that he can. I don't know where the incumbent, Sean Duffy, stands on that. I've asked the league, and they don't know either. Now, as it turns out, the designate for Transportation Secretary comes from my state, Wisconsin, from the northern portion of it, up in the 7th District, which is Lake Superior. It also is a recreational area. So those are the questions, I think, for discussion and for trying to put the reality of who are the cyclists in this 119th Congress that starts to sit in January, and that we'll be dealing with from the standpoint of who's going to affect bicycling, who's going to affect all of the legislative sides of the industry, of the cyclist, of retail.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have the thought of you guys joining me there. I do think that'll be a really interesting event for us as an industry, and the more faces, the more important people we can get in attendance there, I think the more, positive work we can do. I do want to get into the economic issues. So you pointed out, when it comes to economic issues, we're looking here at consumer spending, inflation, unemployment. You added in there immigration and labor. I want to start actually with the supply chain, though. and think about specific strategies that you recommend for bike shops to navigate potential supply chain disruptions. These disruptions could be caused by the looming dock workers strike, and those relying on the Gulf and East Coast ports. So any thoughts there?
Well, I think, and Fred can chime in on this too, is carefully select suppliers. And we've said this before, look at the suppliers that really truly are going to partner with your business and will be good for your business, as especially retailer. But in doing that, I think you also have to do a little vetting, and to the extent possible, because among the unknowns that we don't know, as Fred points out, is most of the companies in our industry that we do business with are private companies, not public. So we have no idea financially how they're doing. And I look at Stromer. Mike and I talked about this yesterday. Stromer, the Swiss company, Heather, you were going over the announcements with them. It was like November 15th, they made an announcement they're exiting the North American market and will be gone by tomorrow. Like November 18th. And by the way, you can write to us in Switzerland. That's unfortunate. And Stromer's is a very high quality brand of e-bikes. So avoid those kinds of situations where you can. Make sure that you're looking into the background as much as you can. Avoid rumors where you can, because we're dealing with the unknown unknowns, as Fred said. But try to be selective in making sure you're dealing with the best quality suppliers you can find that are interested in your business and helping your business make money, and making sure that they're people that want to work with you from an inventory and stocking standpoint to make that happen. That and the things like a dock strike, there isn't an awful lot on the supply side that the retailer can do other than making sure they're dealing with, the Walmarts instead of the Targets, as I point out, where you can pick up the information, where or can find out that a distributor, a wholesaler, a brand has done a good job of managing the flow and getting product in. And again, a lot of this is dealing with the unknowns, because you got to ask the network, ask the reps, ask the independent reps, talk it up and find out what's going on in your market. So I think a great deal of this is the retailers, number one, finding out what's happening and working with the best quality suppliers they can, and also doing what P2 does an excellent job of, and that's network with your peers.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, the communication part is really important there. Stromer, their news was shocking, and they didn't give much notice. So we do want partners who, if able, can give us a better heads up. Fred, Mike, Steve, anything more from your side here?
Maybe I'll amplify a little bit what Jay just said, but I'll be brief here. That I think communicating, choosing suppliers, of course, try to pick the most reliable and consistent suppliers you can, but also through a time like this where it's going to be a lot of unknowns happening, communicate regularly with them and do the best you can to get beyond the rep level. Again, but even then realize that they may have no clue either. There's a lot of unknowns for the supply side, and they don't know where their supply is. Even they can do their best to manage it, and you can do your best to communicate, and it's still the Wild West. They don't really know what's going on either. I doubt that the Stromer reps knew that they were going to just lock up and close one day. And so, take things with a grain of salt would be my advice. Communicate best you can. Try to get allies at the upper management levels if you can, and try to build a relationship of mutual support there if you can.
Yeah, I like that advice. Mike, were you going to chime in too?
Just basically to endorse everything that Fred and Jay and Steve have pointed out so far. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns relative to the future. We're always talking. My focus is on technology, and there's a lot of things happening on that front. That some of which will, and some of which won't be affected by the change in the administration. So. The main point I wanted to make during the course of today's event was to plug the upcoming CABDA shows. We're preparing some, I think, pretty informative webinars, not webinars, but seminars discussing those. I mean, there's a lot happening on the IoT front, the Internet of Things front. We touched on V2X a couple days ago in one of our conversations. Heather, you and I have exchanged emails, and you inquired at one point whether or not I had plans to attend the Consumer Electronics Show. Jay and I discussed it. I will be attending because I think that's going to be an opportunity to get some timely insight into a lot of stuff that's going to affect the industry from a technology standpoint coming forward. A lot of it will be related to batteries and the issues that we've had with lithium-ion batteries, but a lot of it's going to be on other relevant things that are happening that we should keep an eye on from a industry standpoint. So, but relative to the policies and you know, vis-a-vis tariffs and what's going to happen to the economy, you know, I defer to Jay and Fred and Steve relative to those things. So it's going to be an interesting ride. Hang on to your hat.
It is. And Mike, when I saw that you were going to attend that show, thank you so much. The work you do is so important to the industry, and I know you love it, but it does, you know, outside of that, it helps so much. So thank you. And the CABDA shows, yes, we have a great education agenda assembled. I'm so thankful to the experts who will be sharing at those shows. Jay, I want to touch on the immigration side.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes I personally feel removed, right? And I even hate that I say that. But in thinking about the immigration side of things, do you think that the policies, if they are enacted, including like mass deportations, are going to directly affect labor availability and just even consumer spending in the bicycle industry? I mean, you touched on that, but a little bit more when it comes to how you think it'll impact the industry.
Well, I mentioned the fact that you know, the immigration side, or the population of migrants into this country, make up the lower portion of the bike market. So they're more of a mass merchant and a mass product impact. But you know, if we look at where that lies, that's pushing 80% of the market. So that's bound to have, if there's, you know, if you look at the cascading effects here. Again, if you look at the chatter that's coming out of the administration, that was the very first thing that the president-elect jumped on and said he was going to appoint. And one of the first appointments was Tom Homan, Homan, as ICE, and then as the ICE head, the Customs and Immigration Bureau, or side of our country. But he also named him the border czar for the northern border and the southern border. Holman has been active in this through the Biden administration. He's served many presidents, but he's also been very vocal from the time that he was nominated. Keep in mind, this isn't a cabinet position, but this was one of the first nominees that the current administration and the president-elect named, and there were many that followed. There were like 20 or 25 that followed this. So it puts immigration as, yes, he's serious about what he's going to do. What he's going to do specifically, let me back that up. He's serious about doing something. Exactly what it is, as Fred said, is unknown, but what is being articulated as recently as the announcement relative to tariffs, and putting tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, with immigration or migration intertwined. The issue here is twofold: that it's being used, a tariff on Mexico is being used as a bargaining chip in order for Mexico itself to clamp down on migrants or immigrants coming to the United States. Now, the other excuse that's tied to it is drugs and drug flow and the flow of drugs. But if you look at the reality of it, the construction workers in Fred's state of California, or if you look at Texas, where I've seen the numbers, the folks building houses are very concerned they're going to lose their labor force if what Tom Homan has said is going to occur, which is mass collection of people and mass deportations. In the agricultural industry, throughout all of the agricultural states, the numbers have popped up now to show that 42% of the agricultural workers in this country are undocumented.
Wow.
And I can tell you, I've said this in articles that I've written about for the state of Wisconsin. Uh, the big dairy farms in this country cannot do their work. They can't get people to muck out the stalls. And so the migrant workforce is extremely important. A lot of that is undocumented. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not trying to argue the merits of it. I'm simply pointing out that if done in a short period of time, we're going to lose in certain states, particularly those with agricultural backgrounds, big chunks of the population. They
Yeah.
also use bikes. They also buy bikes, not from bike shops necessarily, but they're part of the American economy, the ecosystem that supports the bike industry. So it's an issue that finds its way into even the most recent reasons or threats to put high tariffs on Mexico and particularly Mexico and Canada. The Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, immediately responded by picking up the phone and calling the president-elect and pointing out to him that you don't have a lot of immigration from Canada.
Yeah.
It's not an issue. Well, again, it's a bargaining chip. We're not sure how it's going to be used. I'm assuming from what I've read that there's been no call from the president of Mexico at this point. Probably will be. But these are all intertwined. They're all tied together. But for the bike industry, it means that we're going to lose a chunk of labor force in states like California, Wisconsin, the middle American states, where that's the labor force, and we're not going to be able to replace it. There's just no way to do that. There's no automation to muck out the stalls.
Yeah.
So it's an issue that's going to impact the bike industry along with many other businesses.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot coming down the pipeline. As we're talking about it, I'm just letting it all sit over here. And yeah, it is big question marks and a lot of concerns. I want to touch on climate change, and then I want to check in with Steve over there. Climate change, it's a topic that I'm really glad to see it was included, because I hear from our P2 members, they had to close the shop, loss of business due to weather-related incidents. So any specific strategies you recommend for bike shops, retailers, even the industry at large, to prepare for these regional impacts from climate change? I mean, we have hurricanes, we have extreme weather events. I mean, this is unfortunately going to happen regardless of who is in office, so this is something we do have to battle ahead of us.
The reason it's been included is exactly as you describe it. This is not a political statement. I realize that there is within the environment a tendency to look at climate change as a political issue. This is not a political statement on our part. You've pointed out why it's important.
Yeah.
We're going to see more and more emphasis in different aspects of the economy on this. But overall, if you look at the impact on the United States of events like the hurricane and Asheville, North Carolina, on the bike business, specifically within a market area, we have not put enough emphasis on understanding, particularly in the coastal markets. If you look at the projections, and I realize they're not popular, but in fact, NOAA and the agencies that are trying to track hurricanes and events, storm events and weather events, trying to give warning and give us an idea of the economic impacts, are going to become more important to us, because, like it or not, we're going to have to look at advising cyclists where they can ride or not. But more importantly, it's where do you locate a store?
Yeah.
But where retailers, I would not at this point advise a client to put a store in Asheville, North Carolina. Quite frankly, just because there's good riding there, but these are not these are 50-year events. This was a hurricane that came up through the Gulf of a group of hurricanes that were the largest number to date. And what's projected is there'll be more of them with those intensities next year. That hurricane reached further than was anticipated, wasn't even forecast, but now it's into the forecasting software. There's an idea of how far these things could go and what kind of damage they could cause, and in turn, what businesses need to do. And I hate to say that, but this is going to be the same thing for any clients that we have in Florida, down through the Gulf, and that's Texas. And we're going to look at Fred, we're going to look at California very seriously because of the weather events, but look at what's occurring in the Northwest at this point, and the type of weather event that's being described, atmospheric rivers, which were not new, but a thing that none of us worried about until the realization that because what's occurring as a result of climate change that makes these hurricanes so dangerous, that makes atmospheric rivers so dangerous, is more moisture that's in the atmosphere, and more moisture is being dumped when these storms occur. That's happening in the middle part of the country where I live, as rainstorms, as high winds, and more tornadoes.
Don't forget about the, what do they call it? The polar vortex.
Well, then we
For
get
us that live in the northern states, that's also a pretty dramatic impact.
it is. But bottom line is, bike shops pretty well understand that. You don't ride a bike in that kind of weather to speak. I know, Heather, you go out when it's that kind of weather, but most people don't. But it's understanding the geography that goes along with the weather events that can affect our business.
Yeah.
And part of this is just basically being smart relative to where you locate a business. Then in turn, things that Mike gets involved in, like when you've got clients that come in, consumer clients affected by a storm where they've had a lithium ion battery or an e-bike with a battery immersed in water, whether that's salt water or not. What do you do? That's a compromised battery. And so that has to be dealt with. That's different than a compromised bike that doesn't have a lithium ion battery on board. So those are the kinds of things that I think we have to make sure we're wrapping up in this advice.
Lots of considerations, and it's a little common sense mixed with a little strategic thinking for, learning from history and planning for the future. Steve, you're just back from a trip. You went with your wife to Southwest Asia. Welcome home.
Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't miss this article that you also wrote. It wasn't in the Micromobility Reporter, but for our listeners, when you go to the Human Powered Solutions website, you'll click on articles. You can see the reporter, and you'll also see Steve's article. It's titled "Your Issues Are Not Yours Alone," and this was written just back from this trip you took. So tell us a little bit more.
Well, and that was the whole concept. I had an opportunity. My wife and I traveled out of the country, and so I thought maybe I'd just wander into a couple of bike shops and see if what we've been experiencing in the American market is what they've been experiencing other markets. And the short answer is yes, they are. Sales are down, inventory overhang. It's just been tough all over. The supply chain has been brutal to get the product, to get it out. Most of the stores that I talk to, sales are way down. They just haven't had the traffic in there. So what we're seeing here in the United States is what these bike dealers are seeing in other parts of the world as well. Now, how are they dealing with it? Right? They've got some interesting strategies. Most of the stores that I visited, to be perfectly blunt, were much smaller than what we see in the United States. They're almost like boutique stores. Okay. There is a real focus on service. So we talked here about additional revenue streams. And so, in fact, there's one of the locations I visited was simply a service location. They did not sell bikes.
Wow.
But they were doing quite the business, not only in servicing bikes, but in selling components to the do-it-yourself mechanic. All of them said sales are down this year. All of them said they're really not sure what next year is going to look like, but nobody was professing a lot of optimism. They have scaled back their staffing. They've scaled back their store hours. They're doing traffic counts. What are the days they need to be open? What are the hours they need to be open in an attempt to survive? It's also interesting, and we've talked about this a little bit, e-bikes selling used bikes. Where I was visiting and primarily was in Singapore, they don't sell e-bikes.
Oh, wow.
Well, and part of that is because of government regulation. They have to be certified. They have to be inspected. Every 2 years, they have to be re-inspected. And so the dealers just don't want to have to deal with that. The consumers don't want to have to deal with that. You'll appreciate this, Michael. One of the primary things about lithium-ion batteries for e-bikes in Singapore is you cannot replace the battery unless it's an original equipment replacement.
That's a
They
good thing.
have UL certification is required for any micromobility product sold in Singapore. So it's a very strict type of setup, but without used bikes and without e-bikes, they're having to really concentrate on their core business.
Wow. I got to tell you that what you're saying echoes a lot of the things that I'm hearing from my two P2 members, what retailers are doing in the US here. The smaller footprint is very interesting. Focus on service over sales. We've been encouraging retailers to do that too. And the regulations with the e-bikes, I think that's a trend of what we're already seeing it, but we will see that more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve, I thank you for visiting the shops. I know you and I touched base before you went over, and Jay was involved in that as well, making sure that you had, kind of the great questions to ask. So I can't thank you enough for doing that. How many bike shops did you visit while you were there?
Well, I reported, you'll see 3 of them in the my latest Micromobility Reporter. The ones in Japan were a little more difficult. Had a language issue there. But again, most of what I write about for the shops in Singapore were the same thing in Japan as well. It's tough. It's really tough.
Steve, I do have a question. Did you notice any trends? Was there any trends in consumer behavior or preferences, like what was selling that might be something that we could learn from?
Well, and again, as I mentioned, it was smaller shops. So more of them were boutique shops. You'd have shops, they'd sell everything, but this would be primarily a drop bar racing style bike shop. This would be an ATV bike shop. This would be a city bike shop. There was one, in fact, is one of them that I visited in Singapore. The name of the shop was Hello Bicycle. There are some pictures in the reporter. He had a great display of folding bikes.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that was because of the density of the population in Singapore. And the same thing, I saw a little of that in Japan. People are really into folding bikes. And so there you had another kind of boutique shop.
All right.
They're training more of their people to be mechanics. Salespeople and mechanics are not separate groups in a lot of these stores. Okay. Everybody's a salesperson, everybody's a mechanic.
Interesting. I like that. Yeah, we've been trying to tackle that in our conversations when we're looking at payroll, making adjustments. It doesn't make much sense anymore only to have staff that's doing one thing. We need our staff to be versed to do multiple things. So excellent. Steve, so nice to have you back. Hopefully we'll see you at the cabinet shows too. Fred, let's get you in here. It is December. We're coming to the close of 1 year, the opportunity of the new year. We might have some challenges ahead as we've discussed, but where do you think retailers should focus right now?
We've covered most of what I can say at this point in the really unknown marketplace. I would say not that anyone in this environment can be complacent, but don't be complacent. Really monitor your unknowns. If you can really understand what it is you don't know, and as these things unfold, as I said before, there will be a little lag. You might, if you stay right on top of the trends, you might be able to react quickly enough to mitigate your damage. So I would say, be lean. And if you're already lean, what's the next lean step you would take if it really comes down to that? I think that's just a way of looking at things because we're talking major economic potential change here in terms of pricing, in terms of inflation, the job market, climate, all the stuff we're talking. These are really big things, and you're not going to change any of them Your only hope is to react to them in an intelligent way. And so, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but I say it anyway, just to be lean and flexible to the extent that you can.
I love it, Fred. Thank you. Yeah, lean and flexible. I like that. Jay, let's give our suppliers, our sales reps who are listening, some feedback too, thoughts on where they should be focused.
Well, I think from the sales rep standpoint, it's easy because the sales reps are calling on retailers. And I think we've heard this repeatedly over the past months, but make sure that they're giving retailers good information to act on, and also not pushing them to buy, but pushing them from the standpoint of being better retailers, making more profit, understanding how that works. And if you don't, go upstairs with it and talk to your management. I think from the management standpoint, there's some decisions to be made. And that is what is your strategy? Does it include specialty bike retail? If it does not, make sure you understand thoroughly where you're going and what the market potential is. Keeping in mind that from decision making and from the standpoint of market, the United States is not a primary market for many of the brands, even those that are headquartered here. And so it's up to the brands and manufacturers to do everything they can to work within their association to turn that around, to make that different. Go from not making any bicycles, not manufacturing any bicycles in this country. Quit calling ourselves an industry. We're not. But we're a bicycle business that can be if we really stop and think about it. Do we want to be a manufacturing center? Do we want to make sure that we're following a particular strategy? And I guess that's my advice to the manufacturers. Understand who you are, where you want to go, and craft a strategy to make that happen, and not try to be something you're not. Because I think the American business has suffered from that. And we have to quit. We have to quit doing that because it's delusional. And it's to Fred's point. We're in denial and not recognizing what we do know and not doing and acting on what we know to be a fact. And so quit doing that. Start getting down to the reality of who you are, be real, and make sure that you understand where you want your company to go. If it doesn't include dealers, great. Just be sure you tell them that.
Yeah. Wow, Jay, thank you. I like that. Mike, e-bike safety?
It's the same old, Heather. My advice to dealers is, buy and sell certified product. Understand the risks and protocols to minimize that risk or mitigate that risk in your shop, and train your staff and train your customers, so that they can be as safe as possible dealing with these energy supplies. There's a topic. E-bike safety encompasses a lot of things, and there's something that we don't often talk about because in one respect it's less technology oriented, but it certainly is something we need to get on our radar, and that's the hazards associated with out of category product, the stuff that'll go 35 miles an hour, and the issues associated with children riding high-powered e-bikes and rules of the road and mixing with traffic and whatnot. I think that's probably an area that we need to start paying more attention to from the HPS perspective. And it's also something that's going to overlap with a lot of what's happening from the regulatory standpoint relative to the classification of e-bikes, what's legal and what's not to mention local regulations associated with user qualifications and training to use one of these. Some of these out of category products are coming in. They're basically electric motorcycles, and if there's no constraints on their performance and there's no constraints on who can use them, that is an issue is going to continue to grow. So that's all stuff in the mix that we need to pay attention to, because it's all got a very significant impact on our industry, especially as it relates to electric bicycles.
I like that, Mike. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the CABDA shows, and I urge anyone who is thinking about attending to do so. The educational opportunities there around e-bikes are going to be plentiful. Steve, financial focus, let's get you in.
I mean, we've talked about it. Just be mindful. Watch what you're doing. Interest rates are coming down, but we're not seeing the real impact yet at the retail level. Mortgage rates really haven't come down. Auto loan rates really haven't come down. So money's still expensive, and we'll just have to wait and see. Stock market's been up the last couple of days, but that's really not indicative of much other than investors seem to think things are still chugging along.
Yeah. All right. Be mindful. I like
Be
that.
mindful, right?
Gentlemen, thank you for this year-end summary. Thank you for the look to the future. There's a lot of information here. If you're listening, I urge you, when you get to where you're going, humanpoweredsolutions.com, see the work that the team there is doing, and also subscribe to the Micromobility Reporter and read Steve's recent article. Gentlemen, as always, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Bicycle Retail Radio, presented by the National Bicycle Dealers Association. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, please like, subscribe, or leave us a review. Sharing this podcast with your friends helps us reach more listeners and continue to bring you the best content. Remember, we host 2 shows per week with ever-changing guests and fresh content to keep you both informed and inspired. The National Bicycle Dealer Association is committed to providing valuable events, webinars, and opportunities for industry education and connection. Stay up to date by visiting NBDA.com to see our event calendar. Special thanks to Francis Abbott for the promotional graphics for today's episode. If you're interested in advertising on Bicycle Retail Radio or have a guest suggestion, visit NBDA.com to learn more. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Bicycle Retail Radio.